My name is Madeline. I'm 36 years old, and I'm a single mother to my 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Right now, as I sit in our cozy little apartment on this quiet evening with Emma peacefully asleep in her room, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Peace. Real, genuine peace. 2 years ago, I thought my life was perfect. I had what I believed was a loving husband, a beautiful home in the suburbs, and dreams for our family's future. I was completely wrong about everything except my daughter. What I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and my own strength. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you've ever had to rebuild your life from scratch. And don't forget to subscribe, because this journey from heartbreak to empowerment might just change how you see your own strength. Let me take you back to where it all began to fall apart. 3 years ago, when I was 33, my life looked like something straight out of a magazine. James, my husband of 7 years, was 38 and worked as a software engineer for a tech company downtown. We lived in this beautiful house in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, complete with a white picket fence and a tire swing that James had hung from the old oak tree in our backyard for Emma, who was just 5 at the time. I worked part-time at the local library, a job I absolutely loved because it allowed me to be home when Emma got back from kindergarten. Our days had this wonderful rhythm to them. James would make coffee every morning while I packed Emma's lunch, and we'd all sit around our kitchen table eating breakfast together. He'd kiss both Emma and me goodbye before heading to work, and I'd drop Emma off at school on my way to the library. Evenings were my favorite time. James would come home around 6. We'd cook dinner together while Emma played in the living room, and after putting her to bed, we'd curl up on the couch, watching movies or talking about our day. James seemed so thoughtful back then. He'd surprise me with fresh flowers from the grocery store just because he said they reminded him of me. On weekends, he'd take over the kitchen and make these elaborate brunches while Emma and I slept in. The three of us would spend Saturday afternoons at the park, with James pushing Emma on the swings, while I read on a nearby bench, stealing glances at my little family and feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. We had plans, big, beautiful plans. We were saving up to buy a larger house, maybe something with 4 bedrooms, so Emma could have a playroom and we could start trying for another baby. James talked about taking a family vacation to Disney World when Emma turned 6, and I was researching the best times to visit and making Pinterest boards full of ideas. Emma absolutely adored her father. Every evening after dinner, the two of them would sit at the dining room table playing chess. James was teaching her the game, and even though she was only 5, she was getting surprisingly good at it. She'd giggle when she captured one of his pieces, and he'd make these exaggerated expressions of shock that would send her into fits of laughter. I trusted James completely. We shared everything with each other, or at least I thought we did. I told him about my worries, my dreams, the funny things that happened at work, and he seemed to listen with genuine interest. We'd stay up late sometimes just talking about random things, and I felt like I'd married my best friend. But looking back now, I can see the first cracks that I chose to ignore. James started working later more frequently, always with explanations about important projects and tight deadlines. His phone would ring at odd hours, and when he answered, he'd walk into another room speaking in hushed tones. When I asked about it, he'd brush it off as work calls from colleagues in different time zones. He began taking showers immediately when he came home from work, which was new. Before, he'd usually change into comfortable clothes and spend time with Emma and me before cleaning up. Now it was shower first, then family time. He also became more protective of his phone, keeping it face down during dinner and taking it with him even when he went to the bathroom. I remember telling myself that every marriage goes through phases. James was under pressure at work, and I convinced myself that once his big project was finished, things would go back to normal. I made excuses for the changes because I couldn't imagine that the man I'd loved and trusted for so many years would ever deceive me. How naive I was. The changes in James became harder to ignore as weeks turned into months. The warm, attentive husband I'd known for 7 years was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone distant and increasingly irritable. He stopped participating in our family routines, claiming he was too tired or too stressed from work to engage. Our conversations became shorter and more superficial. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give me one-word answers like fine or busy, instead of the detailed stories he used to share. He stopped asking about my day entirely, and when I tried to tell him about funny things that happened at the library, or cute things Emma had said, he'd nod absently while scrolling through his phone. The first major red flag came on our wedding anniversary in September. I'd spent the entire day preparing James's favorite meal, homemade lasagna with garlic bread, and I'd bought a bottle of the wine we'd shared on our honeymoon. I dressed up in the blue dress he'd complimented me on just months earlier, and even got Emma involved by having her make a card for us. When James finally came home at 8:30 that evening, 2 hours later than usual, he looked annoyed to find the dining room table set with candles and our good dishes. "I'm not hungry," he said flatly, loosening his tie. "I ate something at the office." Emma, who had been so excited to surprise Daddy with the special dinner, looked confused and hurt. "But Mommy made your favorite," she said in her small voice. James barely glanced at her. "I said I'm not hungry, Emma." That night after Emma was asleep, I tried to salvage what was left of our anniversary. "I know you're stressed with work," I said gently, "but this is important. We're important." He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold and almost contemptuous. "Everything doesn't have to be a big production, Madeline. Some of us have real responsibilities." It was the first time he'd ever spoken to me with such dismissiveness, and it stung more than I expected. But worse was what happened the next morning when Emma asked me why Daddy didn't eat with us anymore. I found myself making excuses for him that I didn't even believe. 2 weeks later, I discovered something that made my stomach drop. While doing laundry, I found a receipt in James's pants pocket from Romano's, an expensive Italian restaurant downtown. The receipt was for 2 entrees, 2 glasses of wine, and dessert totaling over $120. The date on the receipt was from the previous Tuesday, when James had told me he'd worked through lunch and grabbed a sandwich from the vending machine. When I confronted him about it that evening, his reaction was immediate and explosive. "Are you seriously going through my pockets now?" he demanded, his voice rising. "What's next? Checking my phone, reading my emails?" "I wasn't going through your pockets," I protested. "I was doing laundry, and the receipt fell out." "Right," he said sarcastically, "and you just happened to examine it closely enough to memorize what I ordered and how much it cost." "James, you told me you ate a sandwich at work that day. This receipt shows you were at Romano's with someone. I'm just asking who." His face flushed with anger. "You don't trust me. After 7 years of marriage, you actually think I'm lying to you." The way he turned the situation around on me was so swift and effective that I found myself apologizing. "I do trust you," I said quickly. "I just don't understand why you'd lie about something so small." "Maybe because I knew you'd react exactly like this," he snapped. "Maybe because I can't even have lunch with a colleague without you making it into some big conspiracy." That was the first time James had ever raised his voice at me, and Emma heard it from upstairs. She appeared at the top of the staircase in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit with tears in her eyes. "Why are you and Daddy yelling?" she whispered. The sight of our 5-year-old daughter scared and confused by our arguing broke my heart. James looked up at her with annoyance rather than concern. "Go back to bed, Emma. This is adult conversation." Emma began crying harder, and I went upstairs to comfort her while James stormed out of the house, not returning until after midnight. As I held my daughter and assured her that Mommy and Daddy weren't really fighting, just discussing something important, I felt the first real crack in the foundation of my marriage. Over the following weeks, James became even more distant from Emma. He stopped reading her bedtime stories, claiming he was too tired. Their chess games became less frequent, then stopped altogether. When Emma would try to show him her drawings from school or tell him about her friends, he'd give her distracted, "That's nice, sweetheart," responses, without really looking at what she was showing him. One evening, Emma climbed into my lap while I was reading and asked the question that nearly broke my heart. "Mommy, did I do something wrong? Why doesn't Daddy want to play with me anymore?" I held her tight, struggling to find words that would comfort her without betraying my own growing fears. "Daddy's just very busy with work right now, baby. It has nothing to do with you." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't enough. Emma was smart for her age, and she could sense the tension in our house, even if she couldn't understand it. I found myself overcompensating, trying to be extra cheerful and attentive to make up for James's withdrawal. That night after Emma was asleep, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I was going to pay closer attention to James's behavior, to the inconsistencies in his stories, to the growing distance between us. I told myself I was being proactive, trying to understand what was wrong so I could fix it. I had no idea I was about to uncover a betrayal that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my husband. My investigation started small, just paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. I began noticing patterns in James's behavior that painted a picture I desperately didn't want to see. The credit card statements that arrived in the mail showed charges I couldn't account for. Expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together, purchases from stores I'd never heard him mention, and hotel charges in the city when he claimed to be working late at the office. When I asked James about opening our own savings account for Emma's college fund, he became evasive. After some pressing, I discovered he'd opened a separate checking account without telling me. "It's just easier for my work expenses," he explained, but something in his tone suggested there was more to it. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Emma was at a sleepover with her friend Lucy, and I was home alone, which had become increasingly common as James found more excuses to work late. I was cleaning up the living room when his laptop, which he'd left open on the coffee table, chimed with a new message notification. I wasn't intentionally snooping. The screen was facing me, and the preview of the message was clearly visible. It was from someone named Sarah Chen, and the first line read, "Can't wait to see you tonight, my love. I've missed you so much today." My hands started shaking as I stared at those words. My love, not buddy or colleague or anything you'd expect from a work friendship. I knew I shouldn't read further, but I couldn't stop myself. I clicked on the message thread and found months of communications that made my world collapse around me. "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about how you made me feel. I hate that you have to go home to her. I wish we could just be together all the time. When we're finally free to be together publicly, I want to travel everywhere with you." The messages went back 8 months. 8 months of "I love you" and "I can't wait to leave her," and detailed descriptions of intimate moments that should have been private between a husband and wife. There were photos too, pictures of James and a beautiful Asian woman with long dark hair, embracing on what looked like a hotel balcony. I scrolled through message after message, each one feeling like a physical blow. They'd been to wine tastings together, taken weekend trips to the coast. When James told me he was at work conferences, shared inside jokes and intimate conversations about their future together. Sarah knew details about James's childhood, his dreams, his fears, things that I thought were special between us. When James came home that night at nearly 11 o'clock, I was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open in front of me. He took one look at the screen, and his face went completely white. "Madeline, I can explain," he started, but I held up my hand to stop him. 8 months, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You've been lying to me for 8 months. He sat down across from me, and for a moment I thought he might actually apologize, might show some remorse for what he'd done to our family. Instead, he became defensive. "You went through my personal messages," he said accusingly. "That's a violation of my privacy." I stared at him in disbelief. "Your privacy, James, you're having an affair. You've been telling another woman you love her while lying to my face every single day." "It's not what you think," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then explain it to me," I demanded. "Explain how telling another woman you can't wait to be free from your wife isn't exactly what I think it is." James was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his words destroyed any hope I had left for our marriage. "I didn't plan for this to happen," he said slowly. "But Sarah understands me in ways you never could. She challenges me intellectually. She makes me feel alive again." "And I don't?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "You've changed since Emma was born," he said, and there was a coldness in his voice I'd never heard before. "All you care about is being a mother. You've forgotten how to be a wife." Those words hit me like a slap across the face. I thought about all the ways I'd tried to maintain our connection, all the romantic dinners I'd prepared, only to eat them alone, when he came home late, all the times I'd arranged for Emma to stay with friends, so James and I could have couple time, only to have him claim he was too tired or too stressed. "So this is my fault?" I asked. "It's nobody's fault," he replied. "People grow apart. It happens." "People don't grow apart, James. People make choices. You chose to betray our marriage vows. You chose to lie to me every day for 8 months. You chose to build a relationship with another woman while I was home taking care of our daughter and believing in our family." He looked annoyed by my response, as if I was being unreasonable. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said. "But you did hurt me, and you hurt Emma. She knows something's wrong. She asks me why you don't want to spend time with her anymore." For the first time that evening, James looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Emma has nothing to do with this." "Emma has everything to do with this. She's your daughter, and you've been so wrapped up in your affair that you've neglected her. Do you have any idea how many times she's asked me if she did something wrong to make you not love her anymore?" James stood up abruptly. Don't you dare use Emma to manipulate me. I'm not manipulating you, I said, my voice rising. I'm telling you the truth about how your choices have affected your family. We argued until nearly 2 in the morning, but it wasn't really an argument. It was James making excuses, and me realizing that the man I'd loved and trusted had become someone I didn't recognize. He showed no real remorse, only irritation at being caught. When I suggested we try marriage counseling, he refused immediately. It's too late for that, he said. I can't fake feelings I don't have anymore. And what about Emma? I asked. What about our daughter's right to have her family intact? Kids are resilient, he said dismissively. She'll be fine. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while James slept soundly beside me, apparently unburdened by confession. I realized I was sharing a bed with someone who had become a complete stranger, someone who could lie to my face for months while planning to leave me for another woman. The worst part wasn't even the affair itself. It was the casual cruelty with which he'd dismissed my pain, and our daughter's confusion. He'd rewritten our entire relationship in his mind, painting me as the boring, inadequate wife who'd driven him into the arms of his exciting, understanding mistress. As I listened to his peaceful breathing next to me, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight for a man who clearly didn't want to be fought for, but I also wouldn't make this easy for him. He'd broken our family, and he was going to take responsibility for the consequences. 2 weeks after discovering the affair, James delivered the final blow to our marriage, with the same casual indifference he'd show when canceling dinner plans. He came home from work on a gray December evening, walked into the living room where Emma and I were building a puzzle together, and said the words that would change our lives forever. We need to talk. Emma looked up from the puzzle piece she was holding, immediately sensing the tension in her father's voice. Can we finish this first, Daddy? She asked hopefully. Go to your room, Emma, James said without even looking at her. Mommy and I need to have an adult conversation. Emma's face crumpled at his cold tone, and I wanted to scream at him for treating her like an inconvenience. Instead, I knelt down to her level and spoke gently. Why don't you go upstairs and play with your dolls for a little while, sweetheart? Daddy and I will talk. And then maybe we can finish the puzzle before bedtime. After Emma reluctantly went upstairs, James sat across from me with the same detached expression he'd wear when discussing work schedules. I want a divorce, he said bluntly. I've fallen in love with Sarah, and this marriage is over. Even though I'd been expecting this moment since discovering his affair, hearing the words spoken so matter-of-factly left me breathless. Just like that, I managed to ask. There's no point in dragging this out, he replied. I deserve to be happy, and I'm not happy with you. What about what Emma deserves? I asked. What about what I deserve after 7 years of marriage? James shrugged as if my question was irrelevant. You'll be better off without me. You can find someone who appreciates the kind of life you want. Then came the accusations that cut deeper than the affair itself. He looked at me with obvious disdain and began listing all the ways I'd apparently failed as a wife. You let yourself go after Emma was born, he said cruelly. You're not the woman I married. I thought about the sleepless nights I'd spent caring for our newborn daughter while he slept soundly in the guest room because he needed his rest for work. I thought about how I'd tried to maintain some sense of myself while adapting to motherhood, only to be told now that those efforts weren't enough. You're too focused on being a mother, he continued. You forgot how to be a wife. Sarah and I can actually have intellectual conversations about literature, politics, philosophy. When's the last time you read something that wasn't a children's book? The irony was staggering. I worked at a library surrounded by books all day, but James had stopped asking about my thoughts or opinions years ago. How was I supposed to have intellectual conversations with someone who'd stopped listening to me? This house feels like a prison with you in it, he added, gesturing around the living room where we'd spent countless happy evenings as a family. Everything here reminds me of obligations and responsibilities I never wanted. Obligations like your daughter, I asked, my voice shaking with anger. That's not what I meant, he said quickly, but the damage was done. What happened next was even more devastating than his decision to leave. James announced his expectations for how our divorce would proceed, and they were breathtaking in their selfishness. I want you and Emma to move out, he said casually. Sarah and I need space to start our life together, and it would be easier if we could live here while we look for our own place. I stared at him in shock. This is Emma's home. This is where all her memories are. You want to uproot her from the only house she's ever known so your girlfriend can move in. It's more practical, he said, as if he was discussing a business arrangement. You can find a nice apartment somewhere. I'll pay child support, but I need my freedom. Your freedom, I repeated. What about your responsibilities as a father? I can be a father without living with you, he replied. Emma will understand eventually. At that moment, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs. She'd obviously been listening, and tears were streaming down her face. She ran down the stairs and threw herself into my arms, sobbing. Why doesn't Daddy love us anymore? She cried, her small body shaking against mine. James looked at his heartbroken daughter with irritation rather than compassion. This isn't about you, Emma, he said stiffly. Daddy still loves you. But when Emma reached out for him, wanting the comfort only a father could provide, James stepped back instead of embracing her. The rejection was so clear, so cruel, that even I gasped. I can't deal with this right now, James muttered, grabbing his keys from the coffee table. Where are you going? I demanded. To Sarah's, he replied without hesitation. I'll be back tomorrow to get some of my things. And then came the final insult, the demand that showed just how completely James had rewritten reality in his mind. I expect you to handle this with dignity, Madeline, he said from the doorway. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sarah is a good person, and I won't have you bad-mouthing her to Emma or anyone else. You expect me to respect the woman you cheated on me with? I asked incredulously. I expect you to respect my choices and not cause unnecessary drama, he replied. We're both adults here. After he left, I held Emma while she cried herself to sleep in my arms. I carried her upstairs to her bedroom, the same bedroom where James used to read her stories every night, and tucked her into the bed where she'd felt safe and loved just hours earlier. As I sat beside her sleeping form, I realized the full scope of what James had done. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd abandoned his daughter emotionally, long before he'd announced his intention to leave physically. He'd destroyed our family's sense of security, and then demanded that I make his transition to a new life as smooth as possible. But in that moment, holding my sleeping daughter in the ruins of our former life, I felt something unexpected alongside the devastation. I felt a spark of fierce determination. James had underestimated me, just as he'd underestimated Emma's need for stability and love. He wanted me to handle this with dignity fine. I would show him what real dignity looked like. But I would also show him that breaking our family would have consequences he clearly hadn't considered. The weeks following James's departure were the darkest of my life, but they were also when I discovered strength I never knew I possessed. James moved in with Sarah, immediately leaving Emma and me to navigate the wreckage of our family alone. The house felt enormous and empty, filled with reminders of the life we'd built and lost. Emma struggled more than I'd anticipated. She was only 6 years old, and despite my attempts to explain the situation in age-appropriate terms, she blamed herself for her father's absence. If I was better at chess, maybe Daddy would want to play with me, she said one evening, breaking my heart into even smaller pieces. I had to return to work full-time to support us financially, which meant finding after-school care for Emma and juggling responsibilities I'd never handled alone. The mortgage payments, insurance, utilities, and all the other expenses of maintaining our house fell entirely on my library salary, which had been adequate as supplemental income, but was nowhere near enough as our sole source of support. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake at night calculating and recalculating our budget, trying to figure out how to make the numbers work. During the day, I'd catch myself forgetting momentarily that James was gone, reaching for my phone to text him about something funny Emma had said, only to remember that he was building a new life with someone else. The divorce proceedings began, and James hired an expensive attorney while I scrambled to find legal representation I could afford. His lawyer immediately filed papers requesting equal custody of Emma, despite James showing little interest in actually spending time with his daughter. When I asked James directly about his custody demands, his response revealed the true nature of his character. I want what's fair, he said during one of our few phone conversations. What's fair is what's best for Emma, I replied. She needs stability right now, not a complicated custody schedule that serves your convenience. I have rights as her father, he insisted. Rights come with responsibilities, James. When's the last time you called to ask how she's doing in school? When's the last time you showed up to one of her activities? The truth was, James's interest in Emma seemed to fluctuate based on how it affected his image. He wanted to appear to be a good father without actually doing the work of parenting. The most devastating blow came when James and his lawyer demanded that we sell the house immediately and split the proceeds 50-50. They argued that neither of us could afford to maintain it alone, which was true for me, but not necessarily for him with his higher income. Emma has already lost her family, I told my lawyer. I can't let her lose her home too. But the real cruelty emerged in the financial discovery process. James had been methodically moving money into his separate account for months before announcing his intention to divorce. He'd used our joint funds to take Sarah on romantic getaways, while telling me we needed to be careful with spending for Emma's sake. The paper trail showed dinner receipts, hotel stays, jewelry purchases, and even a weekend trip to Napa Valley, all paid for with money that should have been contributing to our family's security. When confronted with this evidence, James showed no shame, only annoyance at being caught. I earned that money, he said during a particularly heated mediation session. We earned that money, I corrected. While you were at work, I was taking care of our home and our daughter, which allowed you to focus on your career. Being a housewife isn't a job, he replied with stunning dismissiveness. His lawyer tried to smooth over the comment, but the damage was done. James had revealed exactly how little he valued the 7 years I'd spent supporting his ambitions and caring for our family. The emotional manipulation continued outside the legal proceedings. James would call Emma sporadically, making grand promises about fun activities they'd do together, only to cancel at the last minute because something came up with Sarah. One particularly painful incident occurred when James promised to take Emma to the zoo for her 7th birthday. Emma spent days excitedly planning what animals she wanted to see and drew pictures for Daddy of her favorite exhibits. The morning of the planned outing, James called to say he couldn't make it because Sarah's parents were unexpectedly in town. I'm sure you understand, he said to me as if I should be sympathetic to his need to impress his girlfriend's family. I understand that you just broke our daughter's heart, I replied. Don't be dramatic, Madeline. We can go to the zoo another time. But there never seemed to be another time that worked for James. His priority was clearly establishing himself in Sarah's world, not maintaining his relationship with Emma. The most infuriating aspect of this period was James's expectation that I would facilitate his relationship with his daughter while he put minimal effort into it himself. He wanted me to encourage Emma to be excited about visiting him, to pack her bags cheerfully, and to avoid saying anything that might reflect poorly on his choices. I don't want Emma to grow up thinking badly of me, he said during one conversation. Then don't give her reasons to think badly of you, I replied. Despite everything I did try to protect Emma from the worst of my anger toward her father. I never spoke negatively about James in front of her, and I encouraged her to enjoy whatever time he was willing to spend with her. But I couldn't protect her from the reality of his inconsistency and emotional unavailability. It was during this period of incredible stress and uncertainty that I began to see glimpses of who I could become without James. Managing the household budget forced me to become more financially savvy. Handling Emma's emotional needs alone made me more patient and creative as a mother. Dealing with lawyers and court proceedings taught me to advocate for myself in ways I'd never had to before. Most importantly, I realized that the woman James had described as boring and intellectually unstimulating was actually someone who'd been suppressed, not someone who'd disappeared. Without his constant subtle criticisms and dismissive comments, I began to rediscover interests and opinions I'd set aside to keep peace in our marriage. I started reading novels again during Emma's bedtimes, joining online book clubs, and discovering I had plenty of thoughts worth sharing. I enrolled in a weekend photography class and found I had an eye for composition I'd never explored. Small things, but they reminded me that I was more than just a failed wife, an overwhelmed mother. The breaking point came when James made one demand too many. He called one evening to inform me that he and Sarah wanted to take Emma on a week-long vacation to Hawaii during spring break. She's never been on a real vacation, he said, as if our family camping trips and beach weekends had been inadequate. She's 7 years old, James. She doesn't need a luxury vacation. She needs a father who shows up consistently. Sarah thinks it would be good for Emma to see that blended families can be happy, he said, revealing that his girlfriend was now making decisions about our daughter's upbringing. Sarah's opinion about my daughter is irrelevant to me, I replied firmly. You're being petty, James accused. This is exactly the kind of behavior I was talking about when I said you'd handle this badly. That's when I realized I was done trying to make James's life easier. I'd spent months absorbing his criticism, accommodating his demands, and protecting his image with Emma. But he'd shown no reciprocal consideration for my feelings or our daughter's well-being. I'm not being petty, James, I said calmly. I'm being a mother, and a mother's job is to protect her child from people who treat her as an afterthought. It was time to stop playing defense and start fighting back. The transformation from victim to victor didn't happen overnight, but it began with a single decision to stop accommodating James's demands and start advocating fiercely for Emma and myself. The turning point came when I hired a new attorney, someone my sister's friend recommended, who specialized in protecting the rights of mothers and children in contentious divorces. My new lawyer, Patricia Williams, was a sharp woman in her 50s, who took one look at the financial records James had provided and immediately identified several red flags. He's been hiding assets, Fatam, she told me bluntly. The separate account is just the beginning. We need to dig deeper. What we discovered was even more damaging than I'd imagined. James had been systematically transferring money to accounts I didn't know existed, using our joint funds to finance his affair, while claiming we needed to cut back on household expenses. He'd even cashed out a small retirement account without my knowledge, money that should have been part of our community property. He's been planning this divorce much longer than 8 months, Patricia explained. This level of financial maneuvering takes time and careful planning. We also found evidence that James had been lying about his income to reduce his child support obligations. Pay stubs he'd provided to the court showed a lower salary than what his actual tax documents revealed. He was literally stealing from his own daughter's future to minimize his financial responsibilities. Armed with this evidence, we prepared for what Patricia called the reckoning. The day of our court hearing, James arrived with Sarah and his expensive lawyer, looking confident and slightly amused. He'd clearly expected this to be a formality, where his demands would be rubber-stamped by the judge. He was about to learn otherwise. Patricia systematically presented the evidence of James's financial deception, his lies about income, and his pattern of using marital funds for his extramarital relationship. She showed the judge receipts for romantic dinners paid for with money from our joint account, while Emma and I ate macaroni and cheese at home, because he'd claimed we couldn't afford groceries. James's demeanor changed rapidly as the scope of his deception was laid bare in public record. He began to fidget, whispering urgently with his lawyer and shooting angry glances in my direction, as if I was somehow betraying him by exposing his lies. Your Honor, Patricia said, Mr. Thompson has shown a pattern of prioritizing his personal desires over his family's needs. He's hidden assets, lied about income, and used marital funds to finance an affair, all while claiming he couldn't afford adequate child support for his daughter. The judge's questions were pointed and clearly skeptical of James's explanations. Mr. Thompson, can you explain why you felt it was appropriate to use joint marital funds for personal entertainment while your wife struggled to pay household expenses? James's lawyer tried to deflect, but the evidence was too overwhelming. James had created a paper trail of his own greed and selfishness. The most powerful moment came when the judge asked to hear from Emma. At 8 years old, she was old enough to express her preferences about custody arrangements. James had assumed she'd want to split her time equally between us, but Emma had other ideas. I want to live with Mommy, she said clearly when asked. Daddy gets angry a lot and he doesn't read stories anymore. I like it better when it's just me and Mommy. When asked about visiting her father, Emma was diplomatic but honest. I guess I could visit Daddy sometimes, but I don't want to sleep over very much. His new house doesn't feel like home. James's face went red with embarrassment and anger as his own daughter expressed her preference to spend minimal time with him. I could see Sarah shifting uncomfortably beside him, perhaps beginning to understand the reality of the man she'd chosen. The judge's ruling was more favorable than I dared to hope. I was awarded primary custody of Emma, with James getting every other weekend, and one evening during the week, provided he consistently exercised his visitation rights. The child support order was based on his actual income, not the reduced figure he'd tried to claim. Most satisfyingly, the judge ordered James to pay back the marital funds he'd spent on his affair with interest. The proceeds from selling our house would be split 60-40 in my favor to compensate for his financial misconduct. As we left the courthouse, James's composure finally cracked completely. This is ridiculous, he said loudly enough for other people to hear. You're vindictive and you're turning my daughter against me. I didn't turn Emma against you, James, I replied calmly. Your own behavior did that. Sarah was right, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. You are exactly the kind of bitter ex-wife who uses kids as weapons. That's when something remarkable happened. Sarah, who had been quiet throughout the entire hearing, spoke up for the first time. Actually, James, she said slowly, I think Madeline is protecting her daughter. After hearing everything in there, I'm not sure I would want my child around someone who lies so easily about money and responsibilities. James turned to stare at his girlfriend in shock. You can't be serious. I've been watching you for months. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. You complain constantly about paying child support for your own daughter. You cancel visits with Emma whenever something more interesting comes up. You've told me Madeline was unreasonable, but from what I just heard in court, she's been more than fair. The public nature of James's humiliation was deeply satisfying, but what happened over the following weeks was even better. Sarah began to see James for who he really was, a man who abandoned his family when they became inconvenient, who lied effortlessly to serve his own interests, and who showed no genuine remorse for the pain he'd caused. 3 months after our divorce was finalized, Sarah ended her relationship with James. He called me frantically, apparently thinking I would sympathize with his heartbreak. I can't believe she left me, he said, his voice thick with self-pity. After everything I sacrificed for her. What exactly did you sacrifice, James? I asked. Your wife who loved you, your daughter who adored you, your comfortable home and stable family life. Those weren't sacrifices. Those were losses. I made a mistake, he admitted for the first time. I see that now. Do you think we could try again for Emma's sake? The audacity was breathtaking. After destroying our family and publicly humiliating me, he expected me to welcome him back because his affair hadn't worked out as planned. I'm not the same woman you left, James, I told him firmly. That woman who begged you to choose our family is gone. I've learned that betrayal says nothing about my worth and everything about your character. I could be different, he pleaded. I could be the husband you deserved. You had 7 years to be the husband I deserved, I replied. I don't need you to validate my value anymore. The conversation ended with James finally understanding that his choices had permanent consequences. He'd assumed he could return to our marriage like returning to a job after a vacation. But I'd built a new life that didn't include space for men who saw families as disposable. 2 years after the worst day of my life became the beginning of my real life. Emma and I have built something beautiful from the ashes of our former existence. We moved into a cozy 2-bedroom apartment across town, far from the neighborhood where James still lives with his wounded pride and string of short-lived relationships. Our new home reflects who we've become, rather than who we used to be. The walls are painted in colors Emma and I chose together, bright yellows and soft blues that make every room feel cheerful and welcoming. We have plants on every windowsill because Emma decided she wanted to learn about gardening, and we've created a reading nook with overstuffed pillows where we spend our evenings exploring new books together. My career has flourished in ways I never expected. After proving myself capable of handling complex research projects during the divorce proceedings, the library promoted me to head librarian. The position comes with better pay, more interesting responsibilities, and the respect of colleagues who value my opinions and expertise. Emma has become an incredibly resilient and empathetic 8-year-old who understands that families come in many different forms. She's made new friends in our neighborhood, joined the school chess club, where she's one of the top players, and developed a passion for writing stories that always feature strong female characters who solve their own problems. Our relationship has deepened in ways that wouldn't have been possible when I was constantly trying to maintain peace in a troubled marriage. Emma and I cook together every evening, experimenting with recipes from different cultures and laughing when our attempts at Thai food turn out unexpectedly spicy. We take long walks on weekends, during which she tells me about her dreams for the future and asks thoughtful questions about everything from why people fall in love to how plants know which way to grow toward the sun. James exercises his court-ordered visitations sporadically, usually canceling when he has social plans or work obligations he considers more important. Emma no longer seems disappointed by his inconsistency. She's learned to expect very little from him and finds fulfillment in the relationships that actually nurture her growth. I've rediscovered parts of myself that got lost somewhere in the process of trying to be the perfect wife for an imperfect husband. I joined a book club where my opinions are valued and sought out. I'm taking evening photography classes and discovered I have a real talent for capturing candid moments that tell stories. On weekends when Emma visits her father, I volunteer at a women's shelter, sharing my experience with other mothers who are navigating similar betrayals. The most unexpected development has been my growing openness to the possibility of love again, but on completely different terms. I'm not looking for someone to complete me or rescue me or provide the validation I once thought I needed from a marriage. Instead, I'm open to finding someone who would enhance the strong, independent life Emma and I have built together. 6 months ago, James made one final attempt to reclaim what he'd thrown away. He appeared at our apartment on a rainy Sunday evening, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, "and I realize I made the biggest mistake of my life when I let you go." I invited him in for coffee, not out of lingering affection, but because I wanted to hear what he had to say from the perspective of who I'd become rather than who I used to be. "Sarah wasn't the person I thought she was," he continued. "None of the women I've dated since have been. They don't understand loyalty or commitment the way you did. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it all away for nothing." His words might have moved me 2 years earlier, but now they just sounded like the complaints of a man who'd finally realized that the grass wasn't actually greener on the other side of his marriage vows. "I'm not the same person you left, James," I told him gently but firmly. "That woman who waited up for you when you came home late, who made excuses for your behavior to our friends, who begged you to choose our family over your affair, she doesn't exist anymore. I could learn to love who you've become," he offered as if he was doing me a favor. "The problem is that I don't need you to love me anymore," I replied. "I've learned to love myself, and I've taught Emma to love herself. We don't need someone else's approval to know our worth." "What about Emma?" he asked, playing what he thought was his strongest card. "Don't you think she deserves to have her family back together? Emma deserves to see her mother in a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection," I answered. "She deserves to learn that women don't have to accept betrayal and disrespect in the name of keeping families together. She deserves to understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to settle for less than you deserve." James left that evening understanding finally that his choices had permanent consequences he could never undo. The woman he'd dismissed as boring and intellectually inadequate had become someone who didn't need his validation or his belated attempts at reconciliation. Emma, who had listened to our conversation from her bedroom, came to find me after he left. "Are you sad that Daddy wants to come back?" she asked with the directness that children possess. "I'm not sad," I told her honestly. "I'm grateful that I'm strong enough now to know the difference between someone who wants to be in your life and someone who deserves to be in your life. I like our life better without him," Emma said simply. "We laugh more now." She was right, we do laugh more. We laugh when we're cooking together and something bubbles over on the stove. We laugh when we're reading stories, and I do funny voices for the characters. We laugh when we're walking in the park, and Emma makes up elaborate backstories for the people we pass. Our laughter isn't the desperate kind that tries to cover up tension and unhappiness. It's the genuine joy of two people who've learned that happiness isn't something you find in someone else. It's something you create within yourself and share with the people who truly value it. To anyone who might be listening to this story and recognizing parts of their own experience, I want you to know that betrayal isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of your real life. The person who chooses someone else over you isn't taking away your worth. They're revealing their own inability to recognize value when they have it. I lost a husband who didn't value me, but I found a strength I never knew I had. Emma lost the illusion of a perfect family, but she gained a mother who shows her every day what it looks like to stand up for yourself with dignity and grace. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you. Not because the betrayal itself was good, but because it forces you to discover who you really are when everything you thought you knew about yourself gets stripped away. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it. Your happiness doesn't depend on someone else's willingness to provide it. And your future isn't limited by someone else's inability to appreciate what they had when they had it. Emma asked me just last week if I'm happy that her father left us. I told her the truth. I'm not happy it happened, but I'm grateful for who we've become because of it. Betrayal taught us both that we're stronger than we ever imagined, more capable than we ever knew, and more deserving of love and respect than we ever believed. That's not a lesson I would have chosen to learn, but it's one I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And someday when Emma is old enough to face her own challenges and disappointments, she'll remember that her mother didn't just survive being abandoned by someone who promised to love her forever. She thrived. Betrayal isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of your real life. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to discovering your own strength? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they know. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding power in the most difficult moments of our lives. Remember, you're not broken by what happened to you. You're breaking free into who you were always meant to be. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always remember that your worth was never up for debate. Until next time, keep choosing yourself.